Hey everyone, Attorney Davis Younts here. This year for the 4th of July, we wanted to do a short 5-video series. We're just going to talk about different elements of the way we think about this holiday, both as Americans and Christians, and how that impacts the way we celebrate. So stay tuned to our YouTube channel and to our social media this week as we begin to think about how we celebrate this holiday well, and check out our video series. Thanks. Take care. Everyone, Attorney Davis Younts here. Happy 4th of July. This is day 5 in our video series we've been doing, just talking about some things that help frame the way we view the 4th of July holiday, and hopefully just give us all some reasons to celebrate and just to be humbled and grateful for the nation that we live in and our Creator God, who in his divine providence allowed us to live in this great nation. So today, what I want to do is just going to be relatively short, but I just want to have a moment in time where we think about some of just the amazing things in the way God showed his hand and his providence in the American Revolution. So we know that two of the key players in the Declaration of Independence, as well as everything else that happened to that, the founding of our country, were John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. And I think it's fun just to think about their story and their relationship as we think about the 4th of July. So they were, in many respects, very different kinds of men. John Adams was sort of a shorter, portly, intellectual type, and he really was someone who took a lot of pride in his practice of law. He valued his practice of law very highly, and he constantly approached things, I would say, as a lawyer, like a lawyer, right? He was very opinionated. Often he rubbed some people the wrong way. He came across to some as either arrogant or condescending, and that was his way. Counter that with Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a quiet, tall, some considered him a handsome man who had some means and was much more likely to either remain silent or use a soft, kind word, not one to engage in a lot of direct critical debate, unlike John Adams, who would enjoy a good sparring session. Now, we know initially they were friends. They both had a clear hand in drafting the Declaration of Independence. We credit Thomas Jefferson with the text, but John Adams had a huge hand in that. They worked closely together in writing it. And John Adams is well respected for just his unwavering resolve in the cause of the American colonies and his passion for doing things in what he believed was the right way. So we know that they went from being friends to being really political enemies. They both served as president, but there was a lot of controversy, and John Adams felt betrayed by Thomas Jefferson, who he considered a friend. When Thomas Jefferson won the election and became president, John Adams rewarded that favor by making a lot of last-minute political appointments that were sort of enemies of Thomas Jefferson that he had to deal with early on in his administration. But what's interesting about them is, even though they criticized each other, at the end of their lives, they began writing each other prolifically, and they became friends again. And they had the opportunity, as they became older, to rekindle a civil relationship where they were able to, spar each other good-naturedly. And what's fascinating about these two men, these two founders, is they both died on the same day, July 4th, 1826. They both passed away on the same day. It's a remarkable thing, remarkable lives that they both lived, the courage and bravery they showed in being part of the Declaration of Independence, their willingness to sacrifice everything they had for the cause of independence, their service to their country. So I think that's interesting. There's just a couple other things I want to talk about as well. So as we look at men like that, and I think it was just divine providence that they both passed away on the same day. I think that's a wonderful just coincidence that God arranged, if we believe in coincidences. And I would like to think, although we have concerns sometimes about Thomas Jefferson's theology, I would love to believe that they were both born again, they were both saved, and they essentially would have arrived in heaven on the same day to shake hands as friends again. And maybe that's not true, maybe that's apocryphal, but sometimes I like to sit back and think about how what an incredible blessing that would have been And sometimes that's how God works. So I pray that's true. The other thing I just wanted you to think about is we could go through countless example after example of the way that God miraculously intervened during the Revolutionary War, bringing about what seemed at times an impossible victory for the American forces. But there's just three quick examples I wanted to give. These are some of my favorites. So think about the Battle of Trenton from December of 1776. This is the famous Delaware River crossing. It was a Christmas Day attack. We surprised and ambushed the Hessians, primarily Hessian forces there, and achieved an important and a great victory. It was a moral victory in many respects. But God ordained a very specific weather on that day that allowed those boats to go across the river. It really could and should have been impossible, but God's hand was in it, not only in the weather, the ice conditions that allowed them to cross the river, but in just the miraculous way they were able to keep it a secret and that it was pulled off flawlessly. That does not happen without divine intervention. There's another story from a little bit earlier in the same year. And this is the story of the fog that occurred in Brooklyn in August of 1776. So during the Battle of Long Island, the Americans needed to evacuate their troops because it was the only way to save the army. They essentially had faced military defeat. The British were cutting them off. They still had around 9,000 troops to evacuate. And what happened is suddenly, a dense fog came across the East River, and it allowed the American troops to escape under the cover of the fog undetected and prevented what would have been the destruction of the American army, the main American force, and likely the end of the war, the inability to continue fighting if that had been lost. So I do believe that was a miraculous intervention. The last thing I'll say is that in 1778, the French finally came in and helped secure victory at the Battle of Saratoga, but ultimately victory in the war. And it was only divine providence that had that timing in mind and that allowed the French to come in and helped deliver the American people. So I do believe that God softened the hearts of the French rulers, and that enabled American success. So we could go through countless examples. We could talk about Valley Forge. We could talk about George Washington being miraculously preserved even earlier on in his military career in order to serve the American people and his creator God during the Revolutionary War. But I think it's worth it to take a step back on this holiday, remember men like Adams and Jefferson, remember the sacrifices they made, remember how they were able to overcome political differences and disagreements, being adamantly opposed to each other, to become friends, to become civil again, and just a blessing of God that they were called home on the same day. And I think as you celebrate this 4th of July with your families, I would encourage you today, take a few moments, sit down with your families and talk about the miracle that was the American Revolution. Talk about the fog at Brooklyn. Talk about just the miraculous series of things that had to happen, the divine intervention necessary for the French to come in. Talk about the Battle of Trenton. Talk about George Washington, his faith and how he was miraculously preserved to be the leader that we needed at the time. And when you do that, I think you'll be encouraged. That will give you all cause for joy and celebration, but it will also strengthen your faith on this holiday. So thanks again for watching this video and this series. I pray that you and your family have an incredible Independence Day. God bless you and take care.